Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy, and ready for this story?
Yes.
Mike Maru is a 37-year-old orthodontist in Draper, Utah. He made a big investment in his education. It's not cheap to go to dental school, medical school, and become an orthodontist, start a practice.
That's a lot of money.
As of Thursday of last week, he owed $1.06 million in student loans.
Okay, see, now Peyton wants to be an orthodontist. Now I'm rethinking that. There's something wrong? Did they calculate the interest rates wrong?
Mr. Maru pays $1,589 a month, not enough to cover the interest. So his debt from 7 years at USC grows by $130 a day. In 2 decades, his loan balance will be $2 million. The Wall Street Journal reporting, due to escalating tuition and easy credit, the U.S. has now 101 people who owe at least $1 million in federal student loans, according to the Education Department. 5 years ago, it was only 14 people.
And now how many? I'm sorry, you said 100?
101. The typical student borrower owes $17,000. The number of those who owe at least $100,000 has risen to around 2.5 million, which is nearly 6% of the borrowing pool. That's a lot of scratch, particularly if you're not going to a professional school with the ability to start a practice like a dental practice, orthodonty, medical, whatever, where you have the ability to actually recoup the investment provider return. That's Brian Kaplan's book about abolishing higher ed or walking away from it.
Do you remember the day you paid off your student loans?
Yeah.
It was a big day. Like, that was cause for celebration.
Yeah. When is that day going to come for you?
Hey, I paid it off when I finally got back to Chicago. It took,
as
a reporter, and my payments were, like, I could double my payments. And I looked at it, and I'm like, I could just pay this thing off.
That's back when you were flush.
That's when Jonas Vizzuto was on maternity leave. I was making money, man.
Yeah.
Worked 42 days straight. Didn't care. It's great. Biggest paycheck of my life. But go on with your story.
Well, Salon.com picks up this story. I mean, this is great. Salon.com, this left-wing rag, supported, more student loans and student loan forgiveness and all of the government subsidies that drive up the cost of higher education. And so this becomes a vicious cycle. Now they're hand-wringing because Trump is president. The nation's student debt burden has soared to $1.41 trillion. It's increased $110 billion since Trump took office. The number of student debtors has continued to grow as well to 45 million Americans. This would be, people are in arrears on their student loans, which is up 2 million since Trump's inauguration. So they've supported all the policies that got us here, that got Maru $1 million in student loans. And now the guy who's been the president for the last 60 months, it's all his fault. I thought when I read this story about somebody with $1 million in student loans, his last name was going to be Moore, but I'm thankful for Steve that it's not. Steve Moore, chief economist for CNN, Wall Street Journal columnist, joins us now. Steve, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Hi, guys. Good morning. Boy, that guy's going to have to put on a lot of braces to make up for that $1 million.
There's no question.
He's got to have braces on every resident of the state of Illinois.
There's no question. He's going to have to do all the Romneys. There's no question. What about that, though, is student debt, the increasing number of people that are in arrears, the overall total debt. Is this a bubble that we should be concerned about?
Well, look, the biggest scam in America, the biggest financial scam by an order of magnitude, is the amount of money that our colleges and universities are charging our families. It is an incredible outrage. And I'll tell you, you guys know I went to the University of Illinois and Champaign-Urbana back in, I graduated in 1982. And my tuition back then was, I believe, a little less than $1,000 a semester. 30 years later, not $1,000 a semester, $10,000 a semester. I mean, what's going on here? My son went to Northwestern. All in, it's almost $70,000 a year now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's ridiculous. You can just write your kids a check for $200,000 and let them play computer games for 4 years, and they'll be better off, and they'll have some money left over. So it is outrageous. We have to start looking under the hood and look at how these universities are spending the money. And by the way, there are literally dozens, if not scores, of universities, including Northwestern, Duke, Princeton, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, that have endowments that are so large they could provide free tuition to every kid who goes to that school now until forever, and they still wouldn't run out of money. And yet they're still charging $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year. And then they go to the taxpayers and they want loans, they want grants, they want scholarship money, all of this stuff. It's totally outrageous.
Speaking of taxes, were you in a fraternity at U of I?
They wouldn't let me in.
Well,
but,
too cool.
I'm not a joiner. I'm a libertarian. I do what I want. So,
well, I just bring that up because sororities and fraternities are facing these massive Illinois property tax bills that are, they went from $13,000 to $71,000, and they have to pass that on to the pledges and to the members. And it's ridiculous, this increase in property taxes in Illinois.
Well, you brought up fraternities, sororities, all this stuff. I mean, let's face it. College today is a 4-year party. I mean, that's where if you want just an education, you just go online and you can get a University of Illinois education for 1/20th of the cost by just taking the courses online. And in fact, that's why I think in the end, Dan and Amy, this jig is up on these university professors who make $250,000 a year and teach 4 hours a semester. It's just ridiculous how much these people are paid, how much of the quote cost of education goes to these kind of fringe benefits that have nothing to do with what you learn in the classroom. So I just think it's time that we have a revolt among taxpayers about how much universities, especially the public schools. I mean, you saw what happened, and you guys know the story of College of DuPage, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, the wines. Yes,
it was a complete scandal. All those guys should have been in jail, right? I mean, talk about a misappropriation of funds. They were paying each other, $500,000 a year. They weren't doing anything. They were giving a crappy education to these kids, and then we say, the problem is we're just not paying these professors, and we're not paying these administrators enough money. You've got my blood boiling today. Thanks a lot.
Well, I mean, and look, your alma mater, it's the second highest in-state tuition in the Big Ten, behind only Penn State. What's happened in Illinois, we have our state schools 20 to 50% higher than their conference peers in neighboring states. And why? Why? Yeah. Because we provide at the state level, despite the state being functionally bankrupt, we provide twice the national average in per pupil state support to our universities because they're inviolate. They cannot be touched. We always need to keep funding and funding and funding. It's the same conversation we have about K through 12.
And the worst thing is you're paying all that money, and they've got crappy football and basketball team. And what are you paying for them? But here's a serious point. I mean, you want to solve this crisis of exploding tuition costs. There's a very, very simple solution to this. And you guys are going to probably faint, or half the people driving to work are going to faint when I say this. How about the kids, these 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23-year-olds, work while they're in college? No. So they actually pay their own tuition. You want to see those tuitions come down, by half, when the kids are actually paying for the education themselves. There's a great school. Do you know the story of College of the Ozarks?
No.
Yes. Well, yeah, go ahead. Tell us.
Dan probably does, because he probably read my article about this in the Wall Street Journal about 6 or 7 years ago. I went out there. It's in the middle of Ozarks. Most of these kids, if they're first-generation college kids, their parents and grandparents never went to college. Some of the greatest kids I've ever met. Now, Amy, since you don't know the story, guess what the tuition is at the College of the Ozarks?
$10,000 a year? Zero?
Zero. You know why? Because every kid on campus works 15 to 20 hours a week paying for their education. What a concept that they should actually have to pay for it. And I got to tell you, these were some of the best kids I've ever met, because you know what? If you have to work for it yourself, you're going to put a lot of value in that education. Make sure you're getting your money's worth.
Well, and just sticking on other models at higher ed, even at a state school, look at what Mitch Daniels has done at Purdue with like the early graduation scholarships and those essentially venture capital scholarships where you marry a student, not literally, you know what I'm saying, combine a student with a benefactor, and there's an investment in the student for a return on that investment once that student gets out of college, right?
I like it, except I don't know if I would invest in any of these millennials.
Well, yeah, that's a whole nother
they're
matter.
Not all terrible. But, this is the problem. All these kids, and this is, we've turned these kids into just, they think that everything is free, right? So they just want it all. College tuition should be free. This is Bernie Sanders, folks. If you think a college is expensive today, Wait until Bernie Sanders makes it free.
Yes.
Then these tuitions will be $100,000 a year. There will be no cost control whatsoever. And it's just a giant scam. The average tenured professor in America teaches 4 hours a week.
Wow.
And they make $200,000 a year.
Well, Amy, you should go back and teach at Iowa. Hey, Steve, let me ask you another question. A good piece in the Washington Examiner about Obamacare. And, you know, since the opportunity was missed to really begin the rollback, you have states further ensconcing Obamacare in their way they provide health care, and it's going to be that much more difficult to extract. And pregnancy to trigger special enrollment periods in Connecticut, extending Medicaid to people residing in the state illegally. That's California. New Jersey looking at bringing back Obamacare's penalty on the uninsured, limiting short-term health care, allowing more people to enroll in Medicaid. We've got a governor here and General Assembly that's increasing premiums for private insurance to continue to prop up Obamacare's Medicaid expansion in Illinois. So is this here to stay, and there's just nothing we can do about it except suffer?
That's a good question. I think we're at a crossroads in this country. We're not quite there, but we're close to it. I think the next 3 or 4 years, we're going to have to make a national decision, Dan, and that is, do we go with Bernie Sanders care, you know, where you basically have, you know, government-run the healthcare industry, or do we move to the private sector? I mean, it's interesting that you've crossed from education in this discussion to healthcare, because guess what? Two industries in America have the most exploding costs:
education and healthcare.
Education and healthcare. I mean, I've said this 10 times on your show over the last couple of years, but it's interesting, isn't it? Those are the two industries where the people who receive the service don't pay for it, and it's an equation for exploding care. So my solution to this is give families choice. If people want Obamacare, they should have it, but you should allow people to opt out of Obamacare and purchase any kind of health insurance they want. And by the way, for most young people listening to this show, if you're between the ages of 25 and 40, you can get a health insurance package that's about half as expensive as Obamacare. So you're getting ripped off if you're a young person and you think Obamacare is such a wonderful thing, because you could get a much cheaper policy if you could just go out and shop around.
He is Steve Moore, Wall Street Journal columnist, chief economist for CNN. Steve, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Okay, guys, have a great week.
You too. Take care.
Thanks. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.